Great. Thanks, Christine. As Christine mentioned, my name's Eric Romich. I am a statewide field specialist for energy education with Ohio State University Extension. And I work primarily with the agricultural audience on energy education and focus quite a bit with on-farm solar energy development, which includes both utility scale development, where we help landowners kind of go through the best practices related to large scale solar leasing and the regulatory process and taxation that goes with that. And then the other area that we've spent a lot of effort in over the last 5-6 years is really helping farmers understand the best practices related to system design to optimize the potential generation from a system on their farm based on the characteristics of that farm, load profile, and so forth. And then really help to put together a detailed financial analysis. And our role is really education to provide them the details necessary to make a good informed decision. I'm not necessarily here to sell solar as much as help farmers, help homeowners, business owners understand what are the key trigger points to look at when you're deciding if this is a good investment for you or not. And that is going to be very much kind of on a case-by-case basis in terms of what might work for one farm doesn't necessarily work for another farm. The other variable is obviously behavioral change motivations. If you have more motivations towards environmental concerns, then obviously you're going to have a different range of what's acceptable when you look at your financial parameters. So that's a little background about kind of the work that I do, the audience that I work with. I guess a side note, we also do a lot of research and outreach related to energy management in agriculture that's really focused on understanding individual load profiles for specific operations and how that might impact the facility's overall peak demand. And we look at load shifting and stuff like that. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Kind of an overview of the program that Christine and I discussed. I'd like to start out just a couple slides high level on what is photovoltaic solar, what are some of the trends in Ohio, touch a little bit on the cost trends. Then we'll break into what are some tips for optimization. So as you think about installing a system, what are some things you might consider? And then I'd like to wrap up with some financial discussions, and I'll try and do my best to move through that quickly enough that I can keep everybody's attention and keep you awake. But at the same time, hopefully raise some good questions for those of you that might be considering this in the future. All right, so photovoltaic solar, how does it work? And I think this is kind of this is an interesting question I get as I work with the youth audience. The nature of children, you explain, well, it converts sunlight into electricity, and then the next question is about how. And so I like to try and give just a high level of how the cells are constructed. So a photovoltaic solar cell is just that. It's a solar cell that directly converts sunlight into an electrical current. So very different from hot water solar thermal systems that we also see popping up on homes and businesses. With a photovoltaic solar cell, we're directly converting that sunlight into electricity. Now, there's essentially two different layers of semiconductor material in a solar cell that are kind of sandwiched together. And just a second here, I'm gonna get my laser out. Okay, hopefully you can see that. I guess, Christine, if you can't see my pointer, let me know. But you can see kind of in this circle here, you have two different layers of semiconductor material. And in order to create this electrical current, we have to have an electrical field. So we have to have some potential electrical difference. Most of the solar cells that we see in the field today are what's referred to as a silicon-based cell, either a multi-crystalline or a polycrystalline silicon-based cell. Silicon, an element found in sands, relatively common. And as you can see in the image here, silicon atom has 4 valence electrons on the outer ring of that silicon atom. So to create a potential electrical difference, we have to add some impurities. So what we add is phosphorus on the top layer, which has 5 valence electrons. And then on the bottom layer, we'll add boron, which has 3 valence electrons. So by adding these impurities, we can kind of create this potential electrical difference, this electrical field that's often referred to as the p-n junction, where at this point, when the photons strike that cell, the atoms are willing to give up one of those outer electrons, and once we connect that to a conductor, we can kind of control the flow of that current. So that's a very kind of quick crash course on how that technology works, but I do think it's kind of important to have a generic understanding of it. All right, solar energy trends in Ohio. So this is a screenshot from the PUCO, the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio website that is pin marking all of the projects that are currently certified with the PUCO. We really started to see an uptick in development following the passage of Senate Bill 221, which was signed into law in 2008, and that housed Ohio's first renewable portfolio standards. And so what that policy did was really encourage and incentivize in many ways the development of solar energy. What we've seen was in 2009, there were 14 certified solar projects in Ohio. Last I looked in early June of 2020, there's 2,846. As you can see on the chart there, most of those projects, so just over 2,800 of those projects, are less than 1 megawatt. And so what that tells us is, these are relatively small systems for the most part. There are a few larger systems, what we would classify as utility scale, that are installed on the distribution or transmission side of the grid. But the bulk of these projects are smaller distributed systems that are installed on homes, businesses, farms. Those would be projects that we refer to as behind the meter. I often get the question, what type of farm should consider PV solar? And that's really kind of the wrong question to ask, because there's really no trend in terms of, well, if you have a dairy farm, this makes sense, or if you have a grain dryer, this works. And it's less about the type of farm, it's less about the size of farm, and the characteristics that we really need to look at to see if the conditions are favorable from an economic viewpoint is, what's your load profile? Who's the utility? What rate structure are you on? Are you on a residential rate structure, or are you on a commercial rate structure with demand charges? How is your net metering agreement going to apply to net excess generation? So these are a lot of questions that really will influence, does this make sense from a financial standpoint, not necessarily what's the size or type of the farm. I want to spend a couple slides on cost. And before I jump into a few charts, I like to give you just a little background on where these numbers come from. The next 3 slides are going to be based on, I utilize the Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory for cost benchmarking data. They do a quarterly benchmarking report on solar systems cost, and I've found it to be extremely accurate, down to a couple cents in some cases from what they're reporting to projects that I'm actually seeing in the field. And, as you'll kind of notice here in the second bullet point, their cost benchmarking, it represents the sales price paid to the installer. So this is kind of an all-in cost that's going to have, it's going to have the hardware equipment cost, the net profit associated with that equipment, installation, all of your soft costs in terms of permitting, engineering, interconnection, taxes. This is truly kind of a flip the switch, the project's running perspective. The values are inflation adjusted to the CPI for 2018. And then also they have a couple of different size categories that they use. They report prices for residential, commercial, and utility scale size. And then you can see for residential, basically it's anything less than 10 kW. For commercial, they look at systems that are between 10 and 10 kW and 2 megawatts. I'll say for most of the farm projects that I work with, they tend to fall kind of in a 10 kilowatt to 100 kilowatt range. So this is a chart kind of showing the annual price trends for both residential and commercial systems. And these prices are shown in what's referred to as a installed cost per DC watt. And so that's a way that we can kind of easily, price compare projects of different size. But you can see there's basically a 77% decrease for commercial system costs from $5.43 per DC watt in 2010 down to $1.83 in 2018. I mentioned that these prices I tend to find are very close. In 2018, I worked with a farmer in Northwest Ohio who installed a 100 kW system on his grain dryer, and it was at $1.86 per DC watt. So very close. In 2010, I worked with a bank that put a 50 kW system in. It was at $5.98 per DC watt. So really kind of in that range. So these next two slides are going to kind of illustrate of that installed cost per DC watt, what is that cost going towards? And you can see the different color categories here. We have the solar module, or many people refer to those as the panel, same thing. Inverter, balance of systems. So these are all kind of your equipment categories. Balance of systems going to include all of your wiring, connectors, combiner boxes, disconnects, racking, that type of stuff. And then you have your soft cost category. So if we recall, for residential systems, this chart's for residential, we were at $2.70 per DC watt in 2018. And this is kind of an important point here. 63% of that cost goes towards soft cost. So non-equipment cost. As you look at the same chart for commercial systems, very similar. Of solar panels and the disconnect box or the inverter, even if you flip the disconnect box, the wires between the panels and the box would be live. That'd have live DC voltage. And so the concern would be first responders, say, that may show up to a fire that could be, totally unrelated to the solar system, but there's an issue with that facility. They need to know they need to know that that system can be completely de-energized so they can effectively contain that. And so you would have to have additional switching gear to disconnect that and isolate that live DC wiring. Microinverters would be the next type of technology. The benefit of microinverters is they do meet the standards for rapid shutdown under Article 690.12, because a microinverter is this little black box you can see in the picture that's behind the panel. So there's effectively an inverter on each module or on each panel. So that would allow, when an inverter loses the AC line feed, it shuts off. So as soon as an inverter loses that AC feed from the grid, it can't find and match that grid voltage and frequency, it shuts off. So it would meet that rapid standard, shutdown standard. However, it is the highest costing of the technologies. The third is kind of a blend, a hybrid, I guess you'd say. So DC optimizers with central inverters, they have little black boxes at the panels that very much replicate a microinverter and allow the panels to operate very similar. They're lower equipment cost than certainly a microinverter. However, there's a high installation cost because it's a little bit more complex to install. But with that said, it does meet the rapid shutdown standards. So 3 different types of technologies: microinverters and DC optimizers will perform better in shading conditions because there's panel level inverters. You could eliminate these 2 panels with shade, and the rest of them are still going to operate just fine. So a couple things to consider if shading's an issue at your site. Temperature, I really don't want to spend a lot of time on, other than like most electrical circuits. And when we think about Ohm's law, as we increase temperature, we increase resistance. And so, you think about a rooftop system on an asphalt roof, there's not a lot of room for that system to breathe. So it tends to operate a little bit hotter temperature than, say, a ground mount system. So something to think about. I'm not really going to get into it, but as I mentioned the word asphalt shingles, just if you're thinking about a rooftop system, think about the condition of your roof and when you may need to replace that before you would move forward with putting solar panels up there. This is the slide that I like to show just to remind people not all systems are created equal. So just because you have a quote for 2 or 3 10 kilowatt systems on your home, farm, or business from 3 different developers, they're likely going to include 3 different types of equipment, 3 different types of design. So really think about what are the benefits and so forth of each system, right? What are the design benefits I like? How are they meeting rapid shutdown standards, if that is something? Are they using string inverters, microinverters? Because that's going to change the cost. And then certainly modules, right? Most modules are warranted as kind of an industry standard to at least hit 80% efficiency out of what they were out of the box in year 25. So, in year 25, they'll produce 80% of what they did in year 1. Another way to look at that is, they typically will degrade, say, less than 0.5% annually. But there are certain technologies, certain manufacturers that have much higher production warranties. So you can see, Panasonic, LG. Of course, you're probably going to pay more for those panels. But the point is, not all systems are created equal. So make sure you understand what it is you're paying for. All right, so kind of moving out of the design, I want to talk a little bit about some financial considerations and give you a couple things to think about as we move forward. So, a lot of times I'll get a phone call from someone interested and they'll say, boy, I have this proposal for solar on my farm. They're, saying that this thing can pay off in 2, 3, 4 years. Is this really such a no-brainer decision? And Unfortunately, it's not. These projects are relatively difficult to kind of wrap your arms around when you're trying to do a financial analysis because there's so many variables that a lot of them we're not necessarily accustomed to. So this is a real quote from a farmer that said, "Look, this is a $19,000 project that will break even in 2.6 years." And on the surface, that sounds really good. And of course, there's a lot of marketing materials and stuff that goes with that would suggest, that's a good project. But when you really kind of peel back the layers of the onion and see what's happening, the initial system price is $212,000. And, right off the bat, there was a rebate program that kind of lowered the price to 200,000. And there were some issues with that rebate program related to taxable income that that we had an issue with, but nonetheless, so you can see that there's a incentive there. This REAP grant they're assuming is going to be funded. It says probable. I can say just from working with USDA, in any given funding cycle, USDA can probably fund 30 to 35% of the projects that are submitted. So what I'm saying is this is a very competitive program. Ohio does a really good job of utilizing the fundings that's allocated to Ohio, to where we typically get a second round of funding allocation because we use up everything that's sent here. So, but if you have to say probable or not, likely or not likely, it has to go in the bucket that's not likely to be funded. So just to assume that you're going to get 50,000 is concerning. Depreciation. The other thing here, we have this investment tax credit at 10%. That's a job creation program that I'm not sure how would ever apply to this farm's solar project anyhow. And then when we come up back up top here, you can see that we're assuming every unit of energy we're generating is worth 11 cents a kilowatt hour. I'm going to kind of talk about that here in a few slides, but that's not necessarily true. And then when we see energy savings, they're assuming 10% energy escalation rates for 10 years, which is very aggressive based on what we've seen historically. So you really need to start to understand what are the assumptions that's going into this. And I've worked in the past with a colleague from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that does a lot of modeling and works on their system advisor model tool. And he always mentions, a model is nothing more than garbage in, garbage out. And so you really have to understand what are the numbers going into the model. So I want to talk a little bit about what's the value of the energy that you're generating and how an understanding of your electric bill can benefit you as you start to look at what are the financial benefits of these projects. So this is a summary chart from a residential bill. You can see they used 800 kilowatt hours that month, $98.80. You can do the division and we can say, okay, the total cost of their electricity is 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, most of the time, that's not always going to be the value of energy that your system's generating, and so it's important to know a little bit more about how and what you're paying for electricity. So if you look at
how do I see the other people?
If you look at the detail or the itemized tab for that bill, you can see we can start to pull out what pieces affect generation. So we're paying about 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour for generation. And 6.6, we'll just say 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour for delivery charges. And it's really it's important to have a good understanding of that as we think about our system, because it'll help us in the long run get a better sense of what the return of that project will be. So I think this chart will help illustrate that. So this is just a generic, right? Here's our home. Here's our solar project on that home. We have our inverter, our disconnect, our utility meter, and then the grid. So wake up early in the morning, sun's not up yet, we turn the lights on. We're bringing energy in from the grid, right? So electricity from the grid to power that light, power your hair dryer, whatever it is that we need to run. Once the sun comes up, we're still at home, lights are on, getting breakfast, using energy. Sun's up, then you're all of a sudden, if you're generating electricity from your solar system, it's going to go directly from your system to the load that's at the house. At that point in time, you could say that you're as close as you'll get to offsetting the full retail value of that kilowatt hour. Um, because we're simply not bringing energy in from the grid. We're instead using it right from our solar panel to power that load and at that point in time. Shut the light off and go to work. Your system's still generating energy because the sun's out. Those kilowatt hours, those electrons are flowing back to the grid to service other loads at that point in time. This is where it gets a little bit tricky in terms of we need to understand what's the value of that excess generation. So over the course of a month, if we would have excess generation going back to the grid, we refer to that as net excess generation. And that's one of the most important things as you look about a financial analysis is to understand how are you compensated for net excess generation. And then go back as you think about system design. And my goal is to always minimize net excess generation as much as possible. So your net metering agreements will determine the value of that net excess generation. And a net metering agreement is simply a policy arrangement between your utility provider and the consumer who's generating their own electricity. And basically it is a agreement that says, regardless of when you're using or generating electricity, you're going to be billed for the net difference at the end of the billing cycle. Now, at what rate you're compensated is very much going to be different utility to utility. So it's really important to make sure that you understand, the rules for your utility because they do vary based on who the provider is. This is a load profile for a farm that I've worked with, and what you see here is this dark blue is their total energy usage for the month. The yellow is their solar generation. And then the light blue is simply the difference, right? So total usage minus solar is our net difference. So most of the year you can see they're still positive, right? So they're still using energy from the grid over the course of the month. And in that sense, there's not any net excess generation. So, these first few months, January, February, March, April, they're getting the full value out of that energy that they're generating. However, you can see in May, June, July, August, all of a sudden we have negative net metering. So what that means is we're actually generating more than what we're using. And so that extra energy that we're putting back onto the grid, the question is, how are we compensated for that? And in many cases in Ohio, you're compensated. You'll be credited to your next month's bill, but you'll be credited at the retail rate for generation. And again, that does vary by utility. Some utilities will actually credit you at avoided cost rate. So that would be what they pay their generators for, which would be even lower. So 4.5 cents a kilowatt hour. But as a general rule of thumb, we want to minimize this net excess generation. I always say to maximize the value of a unit of energy you generate, you want to use it. This is something that we don't have time to get into each of these, but I do like to just kind of look at a high level, the cash flow mechanics of a system. So there is the gross system cost, right? We have to put money on the table to buy this thing. Most of these incentives are tax credits and depreciation benefits and things that take place after you pay for the system. So you have your 26% investment tax credit. That will go down. That'll drop 4% at the end of the year to 22. You have bonus depreciation that's currently available. You can do 100% bonus depreciation in year one. Other incentives, so this would be like a USDA REAP grant, or if your utility has some type of a specific program. Renewable energy credits, we didn't have much time to talk about those. Renewable energy credits are created under the Renewable Portfolio Standards in Senate Bill 221. They do have some value, but it's quite a bit less than what it was, say, 5 or 6 years ago. And then anything that's left after we get through these first 4 steps, the balance that's left, we need to make sure we offset by ongoing energy savings. And that's why, in my mind, it's so important to make sure that we're accurately valuing a unit of energy that we're generating, because it does no good to try and mislead those numbers. It's only going to give you a false sense of return on your investment. A couple of kind of high level lessons learned as we try to move forward and wrap up here. Get multiple quotes. Simple payback is not necessarily the correct financial metric, and we'll peek at a couple of those as we wrap up. Don't mix pre and post tax numbers. Really focus on the system costs, excluding the incentives. Try and compare proposals based on what's the total installed cost per DC watt. Every farm's unique. Understand the value of your net excess generation, and absolutely talk with with a representative from the utility to make sure that they understand what you're doing and can highlight any questions you might have on the net metering agreements. And then many times we'll see accountants get involved with those projects in terms of the taxation and depreciation. With any of these, and even the best modeled project, there is a certain level of risk that's involved, and that risk rests with the fact that policy changes over time. And so it's important to understand that when we look at a 25-year project analysis, it's a lot of things can change over that time. Okay, I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes left here. And I just want to talk a little bit about different types of financial metrics and just give a high level understanding. I know that we won't have time to really dive into the details, but I want to maybe illustrate why it's important to look at more than one financial metric. So when we think about evaluating a solar project, what makes it difficult? And when we think about all the different moving pieces in that proposal that we looked at a few slides back, there was all kinds of variables, right? So the production variable would be one. If we're not generating electricity, then there's no value that system's providing us. So production variables are certainly a challenge. Operations and maintenance costs, inconsistent revenue streams from one project to the other, whether it's the tax credits or additional grants, renewable energy credits, depreciation. And then the value of energy savings in terms of what are the price escalations over that 25-year project lifetime, and variable rate structures as we think about, every utility is, not every, but most utilities are going to compensate you at different levels. So really we look at, there's a long analysis period, and the one thing that's often missing is the recognition that there is a time value of money. I think that the best way to recognize that time value of money is to look at a cheeseburger. The cost of a quarter pounder with cheese, a large fry, 2 large fries, and a chocolate shake in 1998, it was $6.97. Compare that to 2017, $16.26. So, at a high level, inflation is the general level that prices for goods and services raise or go up over the course of time, thus decreasing the purchasing power of that dollar, right? Quick note, these were Canadian receipts, so those are Canadian dollars. The other thing that I think helps us understand the time value of money, if we looked at this and said, okay, everyone in this program, just got the winning ticket and you're a $100,000 winner, this slide works a lot better when we're in person in the same room. We'll have folks raise their hands, right? So you got 2 options. You can take a pile full of cash right now and take your $100,000 and go home, or option 2, I'll send you a check for $4,000 each year over the next 25 years. Which option do you want? Most of the people, at least in past programs, raise their hand to option 1, right? Give me that cash now. What's the reason for that? We can do something with it, right? We can purchase something. Ideally, we'll reinvest that and have that money produce some type of a return for us. So when we think about the time value of money, it's the concept that money available at the present time is worth more than in the future because it has an earning capacity, right? It has this earning capacity to produce us a return. So when we think about the time value of money, just as we can look at adding a return to current dollars, we can look at future dollars and discount them to the present day value. This is important with solar because most of these panels are warranted for 25 years. So we're looking at 25-year analysis periods. And just because the warranty runs out in year 26 doesn't necessarily mean the panel stops working. So, but the point is they're long-term projects that we're analyzing. And so it's important to think about the time value of money when we think about what financial metrics should we use to measure success. As I mentioned, oftentimes simple payback is the one I see that's used most, and that's simply the cost of the project divided by the savings, and until we hit that break-even point. And so I have kind of 3 slides to show 3 different perspectives of this project. So we're looking at a 50 kilowatt system that was installed. Installation cost is just over $88,000. If we look at the simple payback, we're right at a 10.5-year payback, right? So these, as you can see up here listed, these are non-adjusted. So this is after-tax cash flow for 25 years that's not adjusted for the time value of money. Moving forward, we can discount those future cash flows, like we had mentioned, to present day value to take into account the time value of money. And our discounted cash flow table, if we look at our break-even point, all of a sudden this is a 19.5, almost 20-year payback period. And the one thing to keep in mind when we're discounting, discounting cash flows, it is certainly open to interpretation in terms of what's the proper discount rate. So at what level do we discount future cash flows? And that's a personal decision. A lot of projects that I see are kind of 4 to 6% is fairly common. So finally, if we kind of look at the last piece or the last metric, the one that I tend to use most is net present value. And so net present value would be, okay, what's the balance of, or what's the benefit of everything after that discounted payback period is reached? So net present value is pretty simple to understand. If it's positive, it's good. If it's negative, it's bad. If you have a negative net present value, that would mean your discounted payback period is going to occur after the analysis period has ended. So, I'm not necessarily saying there's not value in simple payback, because there is. It's a good first cut type of look. But I do think because these are long-term projects and there's all these variables within the cash flow table, it's important to kind of look at multiple metrics. So I like to look at net present value from a discounted cash flow table. And I also like to use levelized cost of energy, which we won't really get to talk about today. But I think it's useful to have multiple metrics to look at. So closing thoughts, there is a resource that really, anyone that's interested in learning more about this, I'd encourage you to go to this link at the bottom here, the go.osu.edu/farm energy. You'll find that this is a 6-part bulletin series, or I guess a technical report with 6 chapters, however you want to look at it, that really goes into depth on the different topics that we discussed here today. As I mentioned, a lot of times we'll pick a month a couple times a year, and we'll do, in that month, say Tuesdays and Thursdays, 3 weeks in a row, and go through an hour-and-a-half workshop on each of these chapters. But that's a free download for anyone that's interested. And then finally, a shameless plug for an upcoming program. If you're interested in learning more about evaluating solar for your project, we have an upcoming workshop that's sponsored by USDA SARE program. July 28th through August 6th, we're going to do, again, that'll be Tuesdays and Thursdays. So there's going to be 4 sessions. And I do a lot of this work. I'm co-presenting with energy extension expert from University of Nebraska Extension, John Hay. And John and I do a lot of work with the System Advisor model, which is a very detailed tool that's available as a free download for anyone. That's um, put together by the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Laboratory. This workshop's going to be a little different. We're not going to kind of do the traditional, I'm using air quotes here, even though no one can see me, you know, death by PowerPoint presentation, I guess. This will be more of a, hey, we're going to open up the model, and all of the participants in this workshop are going to actually create a simulation model for their home, farm, or business. So if you already have a quote, you know, you can bring that quote and use the information from that to build your own model. If not, we're going to provide some worksheets where you can do a little bit of homework ahead of time and bring information to create your own model. We'll break out into small breakout rooms to make sure everyone's following along and up to speed with the modeling. So put that on your calendars if you're interested. I will send an email to Christine and Gwen to have them circulate to everyone on the call here today. So you'll have the registration link for that if you're interested. With that, I'll kind of wrap up. Christine, my emails here at the bottom. That's the best way to get a hold of me. And I guess look forward to any questions at this point.
Thank you so much, Eric. Can you guys hear me? I'm speaking on my mobile device. Okay, I see some nods. Great. I think that what might be best, because I know there's a couple people that do need to jump off of the call. If you have a question directly for Eric right now, it'd be wonderful if you can put it in the chat box. I do want to go ahead and ask 3 questions for Scott and 3 questions for Judy about their experience with solar before we hit that 9:30 mark. And Eric, if you would not mind sending me again a copy of your slides, so if anybody requests those, we'll be able to provide them. So I see that Scott's unmuted, so I'm going to go ahead and ask. Scott, I'm curious if you could tell us a little bit about the motivation for installing the solar that you have, what the greatest benefit has been, and also the biggest challenge.
Okay, we started, I guess I did this on a whim, researching solar back in 2015. And we were getting some emails and things from a company out of Athens, Third Solar. And so they responded to my emails, and I got them in contact actually with my general manager. And he is a numbers guy, so I knew that that in order to go through him, that the numbers had to make sense. So we had them, and they did a lot of the background work for us. And in order for this to make it cost effective for our business, we had to take full advantage of the taxes, which my business is an S Corp, so it wasn't basically a business tax. It was more of personal tax savings on my part. Plus there was 2 grant programs at the time. They helped us fully apply for those. We did not receive the big grant because we were not high producers of electricity, but we did receive a $20,000 grant, which helped us. And then as we built the model, as you know, like Eric said too, there's no perfect model out there to do. We tried to build a very conservative return on investment model. And for us personally, the only way we found out it made sense for us, if we could find a bank that was going to personally finance us 100%. We were able to do that. So we went ahead with the project. We have been producing or making electricity since August of 2016. And so I kind of did a little bit of work on that. Our project was favorable for Third Solar because we have a large flat roof on top of my drugstore that made it easy install for them. It's a rubberized roof. So they were really incentivized to do it too. So totally we've produced over 300 megawatts since August of 2016. We average around 100 megawatts a year on our production. I checked with my finance department. We are getting about 70% reduction in our electricity cost over the course of a full year. Of course, we do better in the summer months than in the winter months on that. That's kind of what our model basically projected. So we want to make sure that we're staying close to the numbers, which we are. But it became a business decision that the numbers make sense. And we had to really get the grant program in there, and we had to do the tax incentives. And so it's making sense so far. Probably the bottom line for us was that we were making assumptions that electricity costs were going to go up over the next 25 years of the lifespan of this. So we were only going to see increases on a basic 30% of our electricity input as opposed to the full 100% because we're producing 70% of our own. So we've been very happy with the electricity that we've produced. Third Solar monitors our systems just as we do. There's times that we'll see the van pull in our parking lot and they come in and say, well, there's 2 units that look like they were need some work on it. So they be very proactive, go up and work on it, stay on top of things. They're basically up there and we do nothing with them. And so it's been a win-win for us, at least so far. But yeah, we struggled early on trying to build a model that we could compare it to and try to get it as close to real life as possible. So far, we did a pretty good job with that. So we're happy with it. It was a big initial cost. That's why we wanted to finance it 100%. We were able to find a bank to do that. So we were offload some of the costs like that. So I think in the long run, it will be a big advantage to us.
Thank you, Scott, for sharing. We will allow you guys to ask some additional questions for Scott and Eric and Judy after we have a few words from Judy. Judy James is on, her name is labeled as Terry on her screen, and she has a solar array for her home, for her residence. Judy, could you answer basically those same 3 questions? Could you tell us a little bit about your install experience, the greatest advantage, and also the biggest challenge you've had so far?
My son in Columbus got solar panels from Third Sun Solar also, and he was going on about it. And I've always been someone who was interested in solar energy and other energies besides your regular electricity. So I decided to do it. I didn't do it from a business angle. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. I was not hoping to make money by doing it, but I was certainly not hoping to lose money. So I think I've pretty much gotten what they said I would get. I wrote it down. I have 14 panels on my south-facing roof and 18 on my west-facing roof. And of course, the south-facing roof is more efficient. If I was to build this house again, knowing I would get solar panels, my roofs would face differently. I started in the summer of 2016. They said I would get about 37, with these panels, 37% savings on my electricity, and I haven't kept exact records at all, but I think that's pretty much what I'm getting. I've been really happy working with Third Sun. I had one problem, it was because of my lack of knowledge of technology, and they were wonderful about helping me with it and making things right. So did I answer all 3 questions, Christine?
I think so. It was your biggest advantage and biggest challenge. So yeah, I think you've covered all 3.
I can't see any disadvantage I've had. My son did have squirrels not on his wires in Columbus, and he did have to pay extra a few years after this started to get some kind of a cover for his wires. That's the only disadvantage. I guess that would be a disadvantage. But I've been really happy. I would do it again. I can't say I've taken care like Scott has to know exactly how much money I'm saving and earning or losing. But I'm happy.
Thank you so much, Judy. At this point, we will open it up for questions for any of our three guests, Eric, Scott, or Judy. For those of you who are dialed in on the telephone, I will unmute you so you have the opportunity to chime in. If your line is a little too noisy, I will mute you again. But just so you know, those of you who are calling in on the phone, you will be unmuted. And those of you who are connecting on a computer or mobile device, you may unmute yourselves when you have a question or utilize the chat box. Go ahead and throw any of those questions out that you may have.
I'd just like to thank all the speakers today. It's very informative, great information, just a wide, quick variety of information. And thank you all for sharing.
I think there might be some common thought throughout our community that solar doesn't work for us. We're not being propositioned with large scale solar like we're seeing in the western part of Ohio or the northern part, but the sun still shines. And as Eric, I've heard Eric talk many times in his programs about the need for diversity in energy. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. So he commonly says about how each energy source has advantages and disadvantages. And it's good to have a mix of all to make up for each other's shortcomings. So this is a viable option for us in Noble County if it works for you financially, which is probably the biggest challenge of evaluating all this.
I guess maybe
I see there's a
like to
question in the
ask,
chat.
could I ask Eric a question maybe?
Go ahead, Scott.
Eric, since we did run this through my S Corp and put it on our business, Third Solar wanted to put it on our house too, but we're not able to do a tax write-off on our home and our business because we're an S Corp. Is that what you're seeing too? And it hasn't made sense to put it on our residentials because of that.
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, the investment tax credit program, there is a residential investment tax credit program, but the problem is the depreciation. Obviously, you can't benefit from the bonus depreciation on a residential system. And the way that the investment tax credit program is currently scheduled, so we're at 26% through the end of 2020, and then it drops down to 22% investment tax credit through the end of 2021. And then from that point, at the end of 2021, it goes to 10% indefinitely for commercial systems. And then for residential systems, it goes to 10% for 1 year and then expires altogether. So there is a distinct difference between the investment tax credit as you look at residential versus commercial. But again, the investment tax credit programs, it's a one-for-one. I mean, it's a tax credit against your federal income tax liability. So you have to have something to write it off against. And you can do a 1 year look back or actually carry it forward. I think it's up to 20 years to maximize the full value of that. But yeah, those two reasons are, well, I should say three. So the depreciation, and then also, we have had a lot of farms and small businesses as well that qualify for the USDA REAP program. And that's another reason that I think we see a lot of activity in, in ag sector specifically, but also, like I said, businesses that are classified or meet the criteria of USDA as a small business also qualify for that USDA REAP grant program. But I think that's the other reason that we see a lot of it in that sector is that program offers both a 25% grant program. They also have a low interest loan guarantee program that can be used. So, you talked about trying to get financing. I think banks are more willing to loan for projects like this than what they maybe were 10 years ago. But there was a time where that USDA loan guarantee program could help, help banks provide financing for these types of projects. But again, that REAP grant USDA program doesn't qualify or doesn't do residential systems.
Yeah.
So,
Plus the fact that my business is AEP and my resident is Worston Electric, and there was a huge reimbursement difference between those two companies. So the numbers didn't match up either on that. So you need to be real careful on who your supplier is too, I saw. So I'm not sure if it's because of how AEP is regulated as opposed to the co-ops, and I don't even know how the numbers compare, but there was a huge difference in reimbursement on that too.
With AEP being better?
I don't remember. I'm thinking it was, but I could be wrong on that.
Yeah, there's, with AEP, their net metering is essentially they will credit excess generation to your next month's bill. But the part that I feel like sometimes is maybe misunderstood is it's not credited as a kilowatt hour to your next month's bill. It's credited at the retail rate of the generation component of your bill. Of so it's a monetary credit.
Yeah, that was important because it really skewed those numbers too.
Yes.
And so, of course, now they AEP exposed what their markup is on there, because that's the way they were reimbursing us. They weren't going to pay us a markup. They were going to pay what it cost them. So you figure out how much money AEP makes off of us on electric was astounding too. So
yeah. And a lot of the other difference is and I need to check this because it's been a few months since I've looked to make sure nothing's changed, but most of our investor-owned utilities would have what's referred to as the true-up period as annual, right? So they would look at a 12-month true-up period where, essentially any net excess generation will be credited to your next month's bill, and again, credited at the retail rate for generation. And then at the end of that true-up period, they would compensate you for any net excess generation at the avoided cost rate. Now, a lot of our munis and rural electric cooperatives will actually do monthly true-up. So, they'll net meter anything that takes place throughout the month, but at the end of the billing period, they're going to compensate you for net excess generation at the avoided cost rate, which is what it's costing them to get it from their generators.
Exactly.
And then you mentioned energy escalation. That's another area where, with modeling, that I see common issues is many times we can kind of we mix up real and nominal numbers. So yeah, I've seen charts before where they say, look, we've went from 5.8 cents a kilowatt hour to 10.5 cents a kilowatt hour from 1990 to current day or whatever, and they'll do the math and say it's about a 3% average annual increase, right? But those numbers aren't adjusted for inflation, so there's inflation in there, and then they'll make the case that we think that 3% is not enough. We think it should be 5 or 6. So you double that, but that has inflation. That percentage had inflation baked in. So then you doubled it, and then you add inflation into your model, and all of a sudden you can find a scenario where you're looking at the raising energy costs from a perspective that has inflation baked into it 3 times, and can really kind of mislead the return on a project. As I looked at, I would say nationally the real energy escalation rate that would exclude inflation is kind of around just over 0.5%. In Ohio, it seems like it's anywhere from 1.9% real energy escalation rate. So ours tends to be a little bit higher than the national average, but still, it's if you look historically, 1.5% is a far cry from 6. and so, but again, if it's just important that you really ask those questions and understand. And that's why I really enjoy working with farmers to build their own model, or small business. And I say farmers because that tends to be the group that calls me the most, but I'll work with small businesses, homeowners, anyone. But working with them, because you can kind of walk through the model and explain okay, this is what the input category is looking for. This is what it does. You tell me what you're comfortable with. You understand what number you're comfortable with modeling, because it may be a very different perspective. It's on case by case. So
Thank you.
Eric, we had a question in the chat box from Phil, and he asks, is storage cost effective for small installation? I assume he's talking about storage as in battery storage.
yeah, I've still not seen a lot of examples where battery storage is cost effective. There are a couple of farms that we're looking to do some modeling with to see if energy storage would work. But the big thing that we're looking at with that example is trying to minimize peak demand cost. And so I think when you look at the cost of energy from a peak demand perspective, if you really break it down, it's probably 18 to 22 cents kilowatt hour compared to what we're normally used to paying for energy. And so that demand spike is much more valuable. And some of those scenarios I think could make more sense for battery storage than what you might see otherwise. But yeah, batteries are still relatively expensive. I think anywhere from, I'm going to say maybe $500 to $750 a kilowatt hour is kind of what you're going to see in additional cost. It's just not there yet. It's just not there yet. The one area that I think we'll see it break through, though, will be with peak demand shaping. And that's where, I mentioned I do a lot of advanced metering on farms where we monitor individual motor loads. If we find specific operations that are consistently triggering their monthly peak demand, and we know that, okay, in addition to your 11 cents a kilowatt hour you're paying, because you're setting that demand spike of, maybe it's adding 15 kW on the demand at $14 per kW. Now you can see there's that additional cost for that could bring some additional benefit. So it's getting close, but it's not there yet.
Thanks, Eric. If anybody has additional questions, please feel free to ask. We are over that 9:30 mark, but if we still have questions and you guys want to stay on, that's fine with me. I do have a couple of announcements for upcoming events, and one of which I'm going to put in the chat box. It has a Zoom link, and Eric is a speaker at that event as well. So next week, there are 3 different days of webinars about leasing land for energy development. So I'll put that in the chat box, but please continue to ask questions if you have them.
And I can stick around as long as you need me to.
I'm not really hearing any questions or seeing the chat box light up. So just to give you guys a few updates, unless Eric, do you want to add any closing thoughts, or Scott or me?
No, I'll send you a PDF of the slides, and then I'll also send you a link to the modeling workshop that we're putting on at the end of July, in case anyone's interested in that.
That would be excellent. So for those of you who have access to the chat box, you should be able to see the series of webinars that's coming up. They are all offered on Zoom. Oh, the connection link's not there. But I will send that out in an email for those of you who get my emails. If you received the announcement on email last night, you'll get this announcement as well. They're all free to attend, and they're going to cover multiple types of energy development. A big thank you to all of our folks who joined us this morning. Designers Parallel, we're seeing that, especially in our area of Ohio, technology can serve to deal with.